Thank you everyone for joining the GIE Challenges and Opportunities in Africa panel. We aim for this to be an interactive session to facilitate knowledge exchange and promote a frank discussion about the most promising innovations related to GIEs, as well as the biggest difficulties in utilizing them. I'll introduce our panelists, and then Kathy and I have several questions for them. And after we've asked our questions, we'll open it up to everyone else to ask questions. For our panel,
can I interrupt for just a second? I just want to again note that participation in these sessions grants FAO to record audio and video throughout the session. Thanks.
Thank you. Our panel consists of Dr. Lilian Kirimi. Lilian is a senior research fellow and research coordinator at Tegemeo Institute of Agricultural Policy and Development at Egerton University. Lilian holds a PhD in agricultural economics from Michigan State University and has over 16 years experience in research on agriculture and food systems in Kenya and the region. She has provided leadership for research and advocacy on agricultural policy, institutional and policy reforms, and coordination within the agricultural sector. Joining us is also Dr. Michael Wellington. Michael is involved in the delivery of projects and scientific outcomes from the Digital Earth Africa platform on behalf of Geoscience Australia. He's an agricultural scientist interested in quantitative monitoring and modeling of agricultural systems, particularly using Earth observation data. Michael completed undergraduate studies in agricultural science and was a farm consultant before completing his PhD studying irrigation schemes in Southern Africa with satellite-based remote sensing methods at Australian National University. We also have Dr. Laila Lokosang joining us. Laila is a statistician and informatics expert specializing in food and nutrition measurement. He currently serves as Senior Technical Advisor to the African Union Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. Prior to this, he served as Senior Advisor for Food and Nutrition Security in the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program and Director for Monitoring and Evaluation in the National Bureau of Statistics, South Sudan. Laila earned his PhD in statistics from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We also have Mr. Andrew Anguko. Andrew is the Chief Quality and Methods Advisor with the Independent Development Evaluation of the African Development Bank. He serves as Principal Advisor to the Evaluator General, manages an evaluation team on appropriate evaluation standards, approaches, designs, methods, and tools for evaluation work. He graduated with a Master of Science in Biostatistics and Epidemiology from the University of Witwatersrand and a Master of Science in Medical Statistics from the University of Nairobi. So thank you all very much for joining us. As I mentioned, myself and Kathy, our other moderator, have lined up several questions to ask you. And then when we finish with that, we'll open it up to questions from everyone else. So I'll start off. What are the challenges you face when conducting agricultural research in Africa with traditional impact evaluation methods? And how can geospatial impact evaluation methods help overcome these challenges? Maybe we can start with Lilian.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thinking about the challenges that we face when we are conducting agricultural research using the so-called traditional impact evaluation. I think traditional vis-a-vis what we are learning here on the GIE. And I think I want to start by saying that we need to think about this in a complementary fashion. I think that's how we can get to see the value of what saying how geospatial impact evaluation methods can overcome the challenges. So I start by looking at them as complementary. And we have said, I think in these sessions, these 2 days, that most of the impact evaluation we do in a traditional sense based on household surveys. You say these surveys are expensive, time-consuming. So in terms of a challenge, the data will be a challenge in terms of the cost of being able to collect that data for evaluation using household surveys. But having said that, I think the other thing we would like to appreciate using the remote sensing geospatial data is that we can overlay that data with the household level data. Though that collection of that data is expensive, then we can use this as a complementary tool to collect data that maybe we are not able to collect at the household level. I think we said geospatial data using remote sensing, sensing data, we are able to capture bigger geographical areas. So we are not, and we can capture information that perhaps you're not able to ask an individual at the household level because they are not knowledgeable about that data, but yet is important data for evaluation. So I think that's how then we can marry the household survey and the geospatial data. The other thing I think, and we have had it this morning, and I think yesterday, there are cases where household surveys are not feasible because they are remote areas or we have conflicts. I think we just saw a presentation earlier today about Mali. Yesterday we saw one in, I think it was Ukraine. So in those conflict areas where we can do household survey, then we can bring in that data. So in issues of data limitations, as far as the traditional methods of impact evaluation, we are able now to bring in geospatial data to help. The other thing I think we can do, still on data, we can better capture data on things like infrastructure, facilities that households have access to. We ask questions about access to markets, access to fertilizer sellers, access to agro-vets. So that information, we collect it. And of course, there's a lot of bias. We saw yesterday, men and women have biases even in reporting distances. But we could easily use geospatial information to overlay on household data and be able to use that. So I think the next challenge I'd want just to say is that with household level data, we are not able to do very frequent measurements because the cost is an issue. But with the other observations, what we are learning here is that you're able to do repeated observations, and you can use that over a long time. We've had, when you have that kind of data, you can track even long-term impacts. You're able to use that data for retrospective designs, for impact evaluation. So I think that's the beauty that the Earth observation and the rest of that data brings to the table when it comes to evaluations. Maybe lastly is that in some cases, we are called upon to do impact evaluation in projects or areas where it was not planned for at all. So you don't have data to do that. And you don't have perhaps a good way of even getting the counterfactual, the control. But we've seen that other observations can be very helpful when it comes to getting a valid counterfactual retrospectively, where you don't have the impact assessment was not planned for, or it was an afterthought. So you can marry the two data ways of collecting data and have a better way of impact evaluation. I think I'd leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Lilian. Those are all great points. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think she has captured most of the points, but I would like to say also that the difficulty that we encounter is that we are not able to capture the progression of outcomes because when you go to collect data, then you only see what is there. You cannot see what had happened in the past. So with the geospatial methods, I think we are able to monitor the transformation, the outcomes as they progress from changes in outcomes generally. We are able to do that, which is not very possible with the traditional methods of data collection. And as I also indicated yesterday, and she has also talked about it, is about the counterfactual, because in impact evaluations, what is very, very critical is establishing a valid counterfactual that will give you accurate parameter estimates. And that is big challenge using traditional methods of impact evaluation. So with geospatial methods, it is very possible to establish the counterfactual more accurately compared to the traditional methods. I think I will leave it at that because it's just captured almost all the points. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. Moving on to the next question. What innovative uses of geospatial data and remote sensing do you see as the most promising for future agriculture GIEs in Africa? And we'll just go ahead and start with you, Andrew.
Can actually identify data. It actually provides more information to policy makers because when it is able to identify patterns and relationships, it means it will be able to provide much more information to policy makers, which they can now use to make informed choices, policy choices. So that integration, I think, will be very, very critical. Very, very critical going forward. The integration of machine learning, artificial intelligence, satellite imagery, and using GIS software will actually even increase the accuracy and reliability of results, especially in data analysis. So then policymakers have got accurate information to make policy decisions in agricultural research, and even implementers will have a lot to actually make decisions about implementation strategies in agricultural production. So I think that integration going forward will be very critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. We'll pass it over to Michael.
Yeah, thanks very much. In terms of the innovation, I think as Lilian mentioned, the great advantage of Earth observation is scalability, and the challenge for the innovation is to be able to leverage the scalability of Earth observation with regional specifics and local conditions. So we know Africa is very heterogeneous and the farming systems are complex, and we need to be able to capture that in our Earth observation analyses. So one example I could draw from with Digital Earth Africa was the work we did supported by the Gates Foundation with Tetra Tech, where we developed a crop type mapping workflow in Zambia and worked with our implementing partner on the ground there, RCMRD, to go out into the field and collect field data through an open data kit and an ODK workflow that represented the regional specificities of what was happening in Zambia, the specific crops, the fact that there were intercropping, the small fields, et cetera, and then build that through a Digital Earth Africa workflow, which used our continental data products and deliver a product that was specific to Zambia. But the scalability advantage was that when we later worked with partners at FAO in Rwanda and Mozambique, we had an end-to-end workflow which was built. We could go to implementing partners in those particular countries and, of course, capture the regional specificities there. But the fact that our data products were continental meant that we could leverage that scalability of Earth observation. So I think the innovation is in the ability to balance the local conditions with the cost-effective nature of scalable Earth observation.
Thank you, Michael. So my next question is, why are GIEs, remote sensing, and machine learning techniques often underutilized by African researchers, and how can this be addressed? Maybe we can start with Lilian.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think there are many reasons why these techniques are underutilized. To start with, if I give myself as an example, I think it's under appreciation. The researchers underappreciate the value of this and the capabilities of these techniques. We know them, we've heard about them, we collect GPS data for the household surveys we do, but we hardly do anything with that data. We have it, we are keeping it, but we are not using it. I think because we underappreciate the value that it can bring to the kind of analysis that we do. And because perhaps we are not exposed to some of the things that we have seen in this convening. And I think as closely associated with that is that, researchers may have limited geospatial data knowledge. And I say this knowing very well that we are not a homogeneous group of researchers in Africa. There could be in this meeting people who are very well versed, but with the knowledge on geospatial data, but some don't use it because they don't know what data exists, where it exists, how they can access it, and what they do with it. I think that's a big reason why it's underutilized. But again, there are people who are using it very well. So the capacities differ a lot. So that brings me to the next thing, that the capacity and the skills are big constraint in terms of utilization of the machine learning techniques and remote sensing. Some of us are just beginning to appreciate issues of AI and machine learning. So that makes it a little harder to use what is existing. But also, I think limited data availability on some of those geospatial characteristics. We've heard of the need for high resolution satellite imagery. Maybe doesn't exist in a way that we can incorporate in the data that we use on a daily basis. Some of us are learning a lot of things now. Maybe later we may know how to integrate that data. But I think even the limited availability of that data could be a reason that we are not using those techniques. And also the technology could be limited as well. Do we have the capability to store the data, access it and process it? Huge amounts of data. We may not have that capacity, the technology, the infrastructure to do that, leave alone the skills to do that, the infrastructure itself. And I think having listened to the discussions here, I think one of the other reasons that African researchers may not be using these techniques is that we are not collaborating in our research, because we were collaborating with the experts in Earth observations, experts in development, econometrics and geography and what have you, then perhaps that would give us a better appreciation of what these techniques can do, and we can bring our different capacities on board and maybe execute a very good research together. So I think those could be some of the reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll pass over to Andrew.
Yes, I may also add the fact that in Africa generally, and even in other parts of the world, data quality is an issue. And machine learning, artificial intelligence requires clean data. So data which has got missing values, extreme values, and other undesirable features is not fit for these technologies, because obviously we do not want our algorithm to make false predictions, so that is a big challenge. The quality of data is very, very important. And you will also realize that to use these technologies, as I have indicated, data must actually, first of all, be cleaned, and that takes time, requires resources to do that. So that's a major challenge. You cannot actually provide or use machine learning data that is having so many missing values, you know. As I have said, definitely the algorithm will make false predictions, and that one limits the use of these technologies. Another thing which I can also add is that there is lack of awareness on the advantages that go along with the use of these technologies. So most people are still not aware of what these technologies can actually achieve if you use them. So there is actually a need in the research community to ensure that there is awareness creation on the advantages of using these technologies. That one will actually remove that challenge. So the other thing which I can also say is that there are resource constraints, constraints in the fact that there are competing needs actually. So using resources for remote sensing, machine learning, artificial intelligence actually competes with other needs that development partners actually have. So that is also a challenge. So I think I can stop there.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'll pass to Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I'm not sure if it is underutilized. We would always argue that it is because we love using Earth observation at Digital Earth Africa, but it's certainly not for lack of enthusiasm. I don't think I encounter quite a lot of enthusiasm for using Earth observation and remote sensing across a whole range of institutions in Africa, more so than in other parts of the world, I think. At Digital Earth Africa, we're just completing a one-year project funded by the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, where we conducted consultation meetings in 6 African countries about how we can better embed Earth observation technology in the agricultural research and development sphere throughout Africa. And we heard a lot of different views on how people might be able to use EO. Many of the concerns that both Lilian and Andrew shared about accuracy, resolution, all those kinds of things, they came up in many of the countries. But one of the resounding messages was the importance of accessing existing networks and building Earth observation into existing networks. And of course, that varies quite a bit through Africa. So in South Africa, for example, we found there's quite a mature private sector that are doing things like impact evaluations and producing apps that rely on Earth observation data. So the private sector in that part of the world is a logical entry point. In Rwanda, on the other hand, the Rwanda Agriculture Board and the Ministry of Agriculture associated extension officers are a very strong part of the agricultural research community there. So it's logical to work through them when we're embedding Earth observation into the way that agricultural research is done. But yeah, I think networks are important, and it's been, I suppose, the strength of Digital Earth Africa, the fact that we've been embedded with our implementing partners like RCMRD that have a presence in different countries and different regions. And part of our mandate is to maintain the relationships with the implementing partners through, as Lilian mentioned, capacity development. So we run weekly live sessions online in both English and French, targeted to African audiences, and we try and get around the continent as much as we can, delivering workshops in conjunction with folks on the ground who have better established networks than we do.
That's very interesting. I hear both you and Lilian bringing up this piece about collaboration and forging partnerships. So I'm just curious, do you guys think there are any particular strategies where we can help evaluators forge partnerships with Earth observation scientists? And that's open to anyone.
Yeah, thank you. I think I just picked from where Michael left. The need to establish network platforms or even events like we have here today. I think bringing together people who are experts in the different fields helps us to appreciate what would be the needs for impact evaluators, what data do they need, and what is available through the geospatial data. So sitting together, talking together, and agreeing on how we can marry things together will really be helpful. So I think the networking platforms are important, but also not just like here, but I think also we may need to have more, what do I want to say, more specific tailored events, like even courses that we can have, training courses together for people that are doing the EO, the data and the impact evaluators, and as program implementers, just to be able to understand what is this that we need in terms of data, when do we need this data, how can we collect it. So this event is good, but I think a more targeted event where now people can delve deep into data requirements. And I think that would be great, because people will be able to speak to each other, understand where do we have challenges and where can we draw synergy given our different experiences. I think the other thing which I think is important is to see, are we able to create demand for what we are talking about here, the geospatial information evaluations. We do evaluations mainly for governments, like an institution like ours. But are we able to create demand from the government side? And how can we do that if we don't understand exactly what we want to do as a team? So that's why I'm saying a networking event or a more focused event where we share knowledge and expertise is important to help us create that demand, so that governments would demand information on impact evaluation that they could use for learning and even for future programming. But I think also importantly, showcasing successful collaborations. So we have research institutions, universities, government working together with people providing the geospatial information to do a successful impact evaluation. I think if we showcase those, then we can help develop further collaboration and create, I think, momentum for innovation.
Sure. Thanks, Lilian. Yeah, I echo those sentiments about the importance of the network platforms and bringing people together. And I guess to put an Earth observation spin on it, that process is very important when we're considering what kinds of data products to generate and the way that people might interact with the data. So I think, as Lilian described, there a co-design process where there might be some ideation from the scientists as well as impact evaluators, but also the people who might be being evaluated themselves are brought around the table to give feedback on what kind of data is required, but also how that data is curated, who has access to the data, and how people can access the data in what kind of analysis environments, where it's stored, et cetera, et cetera. So very important that that's a circular process that's revisited throughout the impact evaluation or whatever's being implemented.
And you bring up a great point about data. Since all of you are kind of in the thick of it, are there any data resources that you think would be most useful to help improve adoption of GIEs across Africa?
Yeah, so all of our data products at Digital Earth Africa are continental, and we aim to be as responsive as we can to users. So the culmination of that is that we've given our users access to a whole range of data sources that are agriculturally relevant. Earlier in the year, for example, we got a large number of user requests for soil information, so we're able to source and bring in sand, silt, clay, soil pH, land capability classifications, for example, onto the platform. And I think the more that our users are able to integrate those soil layers with other Earth observation information like rainfall, climate, and our Landsat and Sentinel archive. It just provides greater options. But I would emphasize it again, it goes beyond the data. The data is only a very initial step. And we need to think pretty critically about how people access that data. In some cases, a dashboard or a maps portal is sufficient. In other cases, people want a bit more flexibility. So we provide an analysis sandbox where users can access Jupyter notebooks. There's a whole heap of different examples. The data and the notebooks are all freely available and open source on GitHub as well. People can look at some example analyses and then take them to their own area of interest, their own region, and run them. And of course, get in touch with us if they need additional support. So thinking about the data product is important, and we really value our user feedback on that, but it's probably only one step of the way along the journey in terms of how people interact with our data and get the answers they need from it.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add, I think you said what type of data and data sources would be of interest. But I think as we look at agricultural programs, thinking broadly about agri-food systems and the impact of agricultural programs on certain outcomes, I think we need to bring on board some health data, because we are interested in the link between agriculture and nutrition, and health outcomes are important. So if we are able to bring that data together, then that would be very helpful in terms of evaluations.
I can also add that, as they have said, I think program data will be very useful here. And I think some of you must have also heard about USAID that is involved in Feed the Future project. So Feed the Future project, I think they have data that actually can be used here, because in agriculture. So there is a whole, there's ample and sufficient data resources that you can get from USAID Feed the Future, and also other international agencies that are working in the field of agriculture in several countries like IFAD and many other organizations, many other bilateral organizations. Also, National Bureau of Statistics of various countries actually collect data concerning agricultural production, many other aspects of agriculture in the various countries. So I think National Bureau of Statistics of most countries can also be contacted to provide data sources that can actually be utilized.
And I think this is a great point that harkens back to what Lilian said about complementarities. It's not just Earth observation data we need more of, but other forms of data, and ensuring we have the program data as well. So great points.
So moving on to our next question. Does utilizing geospatial data, remote sensing, and machine learning present unique challenges for researchers considering gender responsive interventions? And how can we improve these methods to better allow for gender responsive research? Perhaps we'll start with Lilian.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Rachel, for inviting us, the African Union. Please allow me to seize this opportunity to maybe inform this gathering in the body of online participants to know what the African Union. Because it's the African Union is the umbrella body that brings members, 55 member states of Africa together, and what it does, its mandate is policy making processes and including policy frameworks, strategies for the continent that inform other strategies or development strategies. I used to be for the framework, working in the framework called Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Framework, which is an overarching framework for positioning agriculture to be the sector that leads the other economic sectors on the continent. And we literally all the 17 SDGs, we have at least one framework. And one of the frameworks that we have of the geographical information, GIEs, is the African Space Policy and Strategy. That's a strategy that we have on the continent, and that's why this discussion become relevant. This was adopted in the summit of January 2016. So recently, the GIEs and the Earth observation that I know became a new program that's just in less than 10 years old. And the strategy is vested in the global monitoring for the environment and security and Africa, that is GMS and Africa, which is a Pan-African initiative. And it is an outcome of AU and EU partnership engagements. And in particular, the high-level policy dialogue on science, technology, and innovation. It's a program that under the Department of Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation. It now has physical, it's housed at the AU. It has not only the structures and the physical presence, but also capacities in place. So now the mandate is to make more effective use of Earth observation data for development of relevant operational information services for sustainable management of natural resources and tackling climate change. So this is in a nutshell the introduction to this. The question, the key word in the question is utilizing, and yes, indeed, when it comes to utilization of data, there are challenges that when it comes to data, use of data. Utilization, of course, as you know, is a challenge, is a function of access and availability and access. And in this, we know the challenges that we have, access itself, we have capacities, gaps in capacity, particularly human resource. We don't have adequate human resources. As I said, it's a new program, a new intervention. And we also have most glaringly, and what really is very unfortunate, is the reluctance of decision makers to adopt the GIEs and their integration in part of the development project evaluation. So these are the challenges that we have. And when it comes to gender, as we know, agriculture is mostly smallholders in Africa, smallholders. These smallholders, mostly females. And these technologies, we know, are mostly used by large-scale farms, hardly the smallholders. And that's where gender issues come in. And I know a number of studies that have been conducted that talk about these disparities in the use of technologies and current emerging technologies and gender dynamics and their impact on gender dynamics. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Lilian, do you want to go next?
Thank you. Yes, I would agree that we definitely have challenges when we utilize geospatial data for considering gender responsive interventions. I think because maybe begin by thinking, what is this gender responsive interventions? Because what we need to kind of information we need to get is, I would say, okay, relates to the needs of men and women, the roles and the responsibilities they play in the agriculture sector. We talk about the access to resources, their control over resources, the use of the resources. Those things differ between men and women. The constraints maybe men and women face within the agricultural sector, space, doing different activities, and the type of discrimination we see even in terms of benefit sharing. So when you think about that kind of information that you need for gender responsive research or evaluation, then you find that that kind of data is really not available in the geospatial data sets that we have, maybe because of the scale we are talking about, that the geospatial data does not have gender disaggregated data in it. So that's already a challenge because you don't have the data to use to answer questions that are important for gender responsive research. So we have many gender gaps, data gaps. I think that is critical as we do evaluations. So as I've said, the geospatial data set may be limited or completely lacking in terms of information on gender issues that would need to capture in agriculture and gender responsive interventions. So we may have excellent information in other areas in different studies on the different aspects of engagement of men and women in value chains or even in businesses, but we don't have it at broad levels, neither is it spatially synthesized. So it's not georeference, and so gender dimensions are not adequately then captured in geospatial and machine learning analysis. I think that's one of the challenges that we face. So you don't have clear gender responsive indicators that you can use. But I think there are ways of going around that. That's the question you asked, how we can address some of those challenges. I think importantly is to, what can I say? Would like to say, have a gender lens as we do our mapping processes. It's very nice to see maps showing, heat maps showing vulnerability to climate change for different geographical areas, for perhaps poor versus middle income household, agricultural households. But it's also good to have very good visualization about those gender differences, maybe in access to resources, could be even in vulnerability to climate change. I think visuals are very important. If you show a policymaker the distribution of some of those gender indicators on a map, maybe would speak more to them than just giving them information packaged differently. Yeah, someone said that a picture speaks more than, I think it's worth more than 1,000 words. Perhaps a map, someone is saying is maybe worth 1 million, or even is priceless, because that visualization helps to relay the information. It's a powerful tool of analysis. And I think someone said from WFP earlier today, it's a tool for advocacy as well. So we can do a lot of mapping of gender gaps and also gender information. And I was thinking that because we already have a lot of administrative data, it's possible that we can georeference some of the gender data, link it with administrative data, so that then we are able to provide spatial information on some of those gender indicators. For example, we're able to show female and male literacy levels across different regions. It's important in terms of maybe programming and interventions, and also even for impact evaluation. So we may use some of that information to help us. So thinking about that kind of information, I think we need to georeference the data for gender, but again, I don't think I know how. Not be an easy thing, but that's one way to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you. All those are very interesting responses. So we'll move on to our next question. Having access to data where government programs are being carried out is often a major barrier to conducting GIEs. How can governmental entities and academic institutions collaborate to better address the program data barrier? And maybe we can start with Laila.
Thank you. Very good question. Indeed, at the African Union, harmonization, bringing institutions together, partnership, collaboration. Like I'm getting to know AidData when I received the invitation for this. I'm knowing about Digital Earth right now. I mean, from when I came here and other organizations that are represented by you all audience here. Anything, this different of, for a continental organization whose job is to make sure the continent works in a harmonized way. We share, they share information, they share experiences and so on. And one thing that you cannot take away from the African Union is its convening power. It brings all these organizations together to dialogue, events like this, like what's happening at the AU headquarters for the global. And if it was to be hosted by AU Africa RAP office, based in Accra, it would have been done in collaboration with the African Union. So, and this is the opportunity when you bring organizations, both technical, academia, and governments, the multilateral together to have this sharing of information so that we discuss where the barriers are. And then we would have had that chance of meeting. And the opportunities are there. One opportunity, of course, when you talk about how do we remove barriers, then you talk about the opportunities, what opportunities present themselves so that we can tackle the barriers. So, and I've mentioned the AU-EU partnership or policy dialogue on the research, science, and technology, where it's enveloped or encircled. And that's the focus of that dialogue, is to enrich collaboration between Europe and Africa, particularly in this area of STI. So we could make use of these opportunities, and then we'll be able, this working in silos and, an organization that does very good job in Cape Town, another one in Nigeria, we don't know about them. How we bring them together and let them share. So, and I believe that the organization I just mentioned earlier, the GMES, that is Global Monitoring for Environment and Security and Africa, which is based at the AU headquarters, that could be the unit that brings the glue that brings all these organizations together, and it's EU-AU partnership. So Europe and Africa should have been housed in this way, and of course other partners can come in, North America, Asia, come in that up. Like this Michael's organization should be part of that dialogue and rather corporate collaboration, clinical collaboration. We also we have another. I mentioned the GMES. There's also what they call AMHEOS, which is Africa Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Early Action Systems. It's a center house at the African Union headquarters. Physically, got all the facilities for knowing what is going on there, the earth observations of where risks are bound to happen, climate and all this. But specifically, it's also going to go into other like food insecurity, the data that were presented here in terms of say flooding, and so on. One of the areas I work for is I'm a member of the African Risk Capacity, which is African Union WFP collaboration. I'm a member of the board of that organization, and we do get this information as board members of what is going on. It's right now it's based in South Africa, potentially going to move to Abidjan, and these are part of the uses of this. The information that come here should be followed so that we can tell where the risk is. This organization has got, the ARC has got, the ARC has got an insurance company that's affiliated to it, and it actually does insure countries, risk portfolios, countries that are affected. I mean, they insure and then it compensates, or rather, do payouts for the disasters that recently there were payouts, Zambia, Malawi, Mali, and others are coming, Madagascar, and so on. This, which have been affected by disasters. And, you know, this is to, and the beneficiaries, of course, the farmers, the entrepreneurs who are in the agribusiness sector, livestock, and this. So just to let you know what these opportunities, and this is where we could say we could remove the, tackle the barriers together. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andrew, do you have anything to add on this question?
Yes, so what I can also say is that they can collaborate to build the capacity of all stakeholders involved to actually in responsible data use. That is particularly important. And also, as you may be aware, program data, the quality of program data is usually a question, and I think they can collaborate to develop data quality protocols that outline how program data is supposed to be collected, cleaned, so that it is actually usable. And also developing agreements, memoranda of understanding on how program data can be requested, how it can be accessed, and also describing those data sets in terms of variables that they contain, because one of the major issues is that the program data may exist and the data users may not even know the kind of variables that are in those data sets, whether those can answer the questions that they have. So I think there is a need for collaboration in that area to ensure that program data is sufficiently described in terms of variables that actually they contain. So it creates demand, because you will only demand data if you know that data is going to answer your questions sufficiently. So I think there is also need to be awareness creation on the kinds of program data that exist and sufficiently described for the data users to really know that when I get this data, then it will be able to answer my questions. The other thing which I can also say is that program data is, in most cases, most of them are not georeferenced, and that's a limitation. So they can collaborate through the development of this data quality assurance protocols to ensure that program data collected, or maybe in agriculture or agricultural projects and so on, are georeferenced, because that one will stimulate use of that data. You know, some people may not use them because they are not georeferenced. So that collaboration is important. And I can also say that there is also a need to collaborate and develop disclose and access to information policies that outline clearly how data can be accessed by the data users and the producers as well. So I think they can collaborate in those areas to actually remove these barriers that exist in the use of program data. Thank you.
These are all very good points. I think we've discussed a lot the top-down approach. How can the government improve things for researchers? But many of us here are researchers, and we want to get government entities to be excited and invested in GIEs, remote sensing, and machine learning. How can we further that as researchers? And that's open to anyone.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel is going to add something there. We've done a lot of work with government programs and not just for GIEs, even for traditional impact evaluations. The governments are always hesitant. They look at you as a third party, like you auditing them. So one of the things that we have learned, because they know our capability and they'll call us for laying out baselines. I think they're happy about that because you don't hold them accountable too much at that point. But what we've learned over the years is that you engage the program implementers within the ministry or the program committee so that they understand that to begin with, they just don't need a baseline for the sake of a baseline. They need to use that information later for impact evaluation, especially if it's in the program document. Create awareness on their part so that they appreciate what the baseline is all about and what will be done later, perhaps by our institution or someone else who gets that tender later. So co-creating even the design of impact evaluation later, right from the beginning when you're doing the baseline, helps to get the government officials involved and interested, and then they know you'll have good program data, and then there will be protocols to release and share that data. So I think getting them involved at the beginning, co-creating and building their capacity in terms of evaluation. But when it comes now to GIEs, I'll begin building my capacity to be able to build their capacity as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lilian. I would echo the importance of capacity development as part of the collaboration process, and I've come to view that as a genuine two-way dialogue and observation I've got is that as data providers and Earth observation technical experts, we often get government departments or institutions or whoever it may be come to us, and they know they want to use Earth observation or remote sensing for something like an impact evaluation, but they don't necessarily know what to ask for. And equally, we don't have a very good understanding of the project that they want to evaluate. So we need to go through a process where they undergo a little bit of training in Earth observation, and then they start to ask more informed questions, and the technical assistance and the products they ask for are a little bit more nuanced and informed. And equally, I've learned something about a gender responsive intervention in Kenya or whatever it may be, and I'm in a better position to be able to give technical advice or methodological advice about what might be able to be implemented from an EO perspective. So we certainly approach every collaboration or every request that we get from a capacity development perspective, and we see that as a real two-way dialogue where we're learning and they're learning, and as a result, we start to ask a lot more informed questions of each other.
So I can say that, so if we are talking about investments, I think it is important that the government is aware of what benefits will accrue when they invest in GIEs. So I think it is important to ensure that researchers make government aware of the potential benefits that will definitely accrue from use of GIEs. I think that is something that they probably stimulate their attention and start thinking about investing in GIEs, because you cannot invest in something whose benefits you are not very clear on. So there is a great need for researchers to showcase the advantages, the benefits that will accrue to the government, because the government is operating in many sectors. So like trying to identify particular sectors where information arising from the use of GIEs will be beneficial to the government and other stakeholders, and how it will affect the economy, because the government is actually looking after so many sectors. So what benefit, how will it benefit the population? That information, how will it benefit a particular sector in the economy? So it must be much more targeted to particular sectors, and also advocacy, doing targeted advocacy with government officials, parliamentarians included, to actually lobby so that they can really see how to allocate funds, because it is parliament in most countries that allocate resources to particular sectors. So trying to actually lobby parliamentarians will be very, very critical, because then they can see how to allocate budgets during the budgeting process and allocate resources to particular ministries like information technology, ICT ministries in various countries. So, resources, adequate resources can be allocated, but that one actually needs that their interest is stimulated. They see the benefits that will accrue. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. This is our last question, and it's a big one. So how can the GeoField initiative and this convening help to create momentum and forge collaboration in applying GIEs, specifically in agriculture in African countries? This is for everyone, so.
Let me start. And my answer is, it's a big question, but the answer is simple for me. African Union has now got the capacity in place, as I mentioned earlier. It is got the strategy for that falls within collaboration of continental collaboration, particularly EU and Europe, African Union and Europe, or Africa and Europe, within the AU frameworks. So what needs to be done to get this momentum pick up from even now? It should pick up and getting better. To me, is let's start. We have a facility of doing collaboration, organization to organization. So I simply invite you as AidData, academic, all these institutions to come and co-create a working relationship together, and best by organizing something like this for Africa, where we could conceptualize how we could relate and also do networking and establish a network of all these organizations, particularly if you have interventions in Africa, GIE intervention in Africa. It's better to come under that umbrella. And the rationale is simple, so that there is harmony, there's good network, will know each other, and there is a platform for procedure going forward. Thank you.
So I can also add that it is important to have champions. So having champions, I think, will actually take it forward in various organizations, champions of GIEs. So that one can really be very effective. And also having annual meetings, for example, where now you look at progress that has been made. Like we had this meeting here, maybe the next meeting may actually showcase what other organizations have done since the previous meeting. And also you can talk about effective communication and dissemination of research findings using GIEs, and you showcase the advantages that accrue from the use of GIEs, and ensuring that your dissemination strategies are much more targeted to policymakers, and that one can really or stimulate their attention and interest, so that can move the discussion forward. So we can also say that there may be a need to think about community practice, so, where people who are involved in GIEs actually come together and discuss the issues that are emanating from the use of these technologies. So I think those areas can be explored and have the potential of taking this agenda forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what is important going forward for us is maybe having clear data partnerships, even data sharing arrangements, because we know some of this data is freely available, but some of it is not. So how can we have clear ways of accessing data or data partnerships so that we are able to collaborate? I bring, for example, we have a wealth of household level data, panel data, which we could overlay with some of the geospatial information that's available, and we can work together. So apart from just data sharing, I would think also co-creating projects. Now we know each other. I know what Digital Earth has, know what AidData has. Are we able to now network at another level and see if we can co-create projects and use the available data, or even together work to collect more data, for example, where we think data is missing the gender space, the gender dimension. What can we do to get that going? But I also think it's maybe this convening or going forward, we could think of how to work with funding organizations to have perhaps a call that will require that we're bringing all expertise together. I think sometimes such funding calls cause us to have collaborations even when we had not planned to, so that, and in this case, it would be helpful. Again, bringing our expertise, our data together and see what we can do with it. But also technical support from those that have the capability and support those that are learning, with not just capacity building, but also technical support as people get to use the data. So I think that would be important. And finally, capacity building. I have said technical support and capacity building. I think it's critical so that those of us who are interested going forward in integrating the geospatial data into the data that we already have, we have that capacity to do that, to understand what's this data and how better we can make use of it. Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo the sentiments again on the importance of networks, and particularly, as Lilian mentioned, informal networks, which seem to have been developed at this particular forum, and I'm sure will deliver quite a bit of value going forward. The other observation I'd add, specific to Africa, I note that several of us operate in organizations on a continental basis, and in my case, at least at Digital Earth Africa, we have a mandate to do so, but we know that if we're going to be successful, we have to operate quite frequently at national scale in Africa, and we have to engage with national and regional scale organizations if we're really going to embed Earth observation and remote sensing in things like impact evaluations.
Well, thank you. I know Kathy and I could keep you all night with our questions, but now we'd like to take your questions. If you're online, please put your questions in the chat. And if you're in person, please remember to say your name and where you come from.
Thank you. My name is Tina Moyo. I'm from the Namibia University of Science and Technology. I must say that the conversation is very informative, and also eye-opening for us researchers in Africa, and also getting to know how our colleagues who are in the panel actually have to share with us. So going forward, what I see is that we're actually going in the right track. That's what I can say. We're going in the right track in the sense that we realize where the challenges lie, and we also are aware of where the opportunities also lie. So if we can tap on that and take advantage and work forward, starting from this convening, I see us, making a lot of strides in the right direction. And one stride that I see, very possible, and maybe a low-hanging fruit, is through the African Union. Hence, I'm glad that Dr. Laila is here representing the African Union. So the African Union has put in place a platform where all African member states are meeting. They meet on the CADIP process, and they've been meeting for a long time. So the CADIP process has been successful in bringing all African member states together. And they do a biannual review process where they report every 2 years on specific indicators that are selected within the agricultural sector. So building and going forward, we all have them together. And rather than all of us, AidData and other new partners that are in here, working in silos and looking for each other everywhere, we can utilize the platforms that have been created already and say, okay, let's all come together, as has been discussed, and probably, there has been converging ideas in the panel that we need to come together, put our resources together, pool our resources for a common good. So among the indicators, GIEs might not be there in the current CADIP framework, but that platform can be one that we can utilize and add indicators that speak to GIEs, and then we build from there. That is not a question, but for me, an observation and contribution. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Does anybody have a response to that, or should we move on? Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Sean Luna McAdams from the Center for Effective Global Action at UC Berkeley. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper on the capacity building theme that you guys were touching on, because that's something that we also really care about and want to sort of include new people into this conversation. So I guess one thing I'm curious to hear from you all is how do you guys think of this in terms of from short, medium, and long term, right? Because it seems here, short term, you matchmake, you link someone that has the EO expertise with someone that has an interesting policy relevant question, and then they work together and hopefully generate some good evidence. And in the long term, hopefully universities and academic institutions on the continent will have geospatial training programs and degrees that will create a whole new generation of folks that can go out into the world and do that analysis. But the tricky middle area is sort of where I'm curious to hear your input. What are sort of the best approaches to transferring that knowledge to folks that are doing the work there, so that it's not, we move away from the current model, which is sort of the partnership matchmaking model?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Great question. Probably not a simple or an easy answer. I think, in a sense, you've answered it yourself. There's a whole spectrum of capacity development activities that I think are worth implementing, and they cater for different users of Earth observation data generally, and users with different needs. So in some cases, we've got a lot of requests recently for even what we probably historically perceived to be material that was too short. So like a 3-minute or a 5-minute YouTube video. For some folks, that's all they really need and want to understand. They just want to inspect visually an image that was recently acquired. And so we've identified an unmet need there for really short, sharp capacity development material, which will hopefully be implementing. Quite a bit of our material has been sort of that middle form, like a 1-hour session where it's interactive and people can ask questions, and then that's recorded and made available. And then equally, we've got a self-paced online course that you can tackle in about a day or an hour a day over a week. But I guess the partnership model, if I understood you correctly, kind of evolves naturally. Users identify themselves as people with particular interests, and we've kind of stepped back and given people the space to basically identify themselves and do that. And so when they come to us with particular analytical challenges that they might need capacity assistance on, we provide those human resources, but also analytical resources in terms of bigger computational environments that they can access. And then it's a snowball where they learn different computational techniques, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I guess as you suggested in your question, there's a whole spectrum of entry points and methods of delivery that are appropriate for different audiences.
Yeah, if I may add, from a research perspective, I think we can fit in that medium term space. I think going back to the issue of creating projects, people will learn while doing projects. I think we benefited a lot on RCTs from UC Davis, working with Michael Carter on the ground, doing the work ourselves. So we developed that capacity in the institute. And I think this is still a good model that could be followed. For those who are interested in doing research, sit with those who have the know-how. So there's some technical support, some capacity building, but better still, learning while doing something.
Maybe I can also add that just to add on what she has talked about, that's a very strong point because you can bring experts through collaboration during program design and implementation. So people who have knowledge in these areas so that you will learn from them. So in addition to that, there are also universities now that offer online courses like MIT, Harvard, Yale. They offer online courses, 7 modules on these areas, which I think people can also be encouraged to really make use of those online courses and benefit from the knowledge online without leaving their stations. So I think that can also be very critical. Thank you.
So I think listening to this conversation, one often gets the sense that impact evaluation is an end in itself, but of course it's not. It's the purpose of evaluation is actually extension, right? And it strikes me that the same methods, the geospatial methods, can be useful in identifying, say, places that might be suitable for certain kinds of applications. And I just wonder if you would comment whether you've had experience in that regard, whether it's kind of the same set of technical needs, or is it a different set of technical needs in terms of, say, particularly in agriculture, identifying areas where if this intervention worked well in this area, but not this area, we should target this area and not the area. I'm just wondering, is that the same need or is it something different?
Yeah, to be honest, in our experience, we haven't had a great deal of exposure to impact evaluations, and I've aimed to cater my comments towards those, but increasingly it's the kinds of scenarios that you're describing that we get asked to work on. Land capability assessments. I guess the key difference is that you don't necessarily have to have a counterfactual and all this kind of economic jargon, which I'm getting my head around now. When you're doing forecasting or capability assessments or general monitoring activities, but from an Earth observation perspective, I think the techniques are very similar, and I guess I would emphasize in the example that you bring up in terms of capability assessments. I think the Earth observation communities are moving away from a biophysical emphasis in those particular activities, and we know in Africa to have a successful rice production area or irrigation area, then the key variables that we're interested in are proximity to major roads and highways that are well maintained, proximities to human settlements, urban developments, all those things, and we build those covariates into our models along with the biophysical capability as well.
Okay. I'm Claudia from Innovations for Poverty Action. A comment and then a question, if that's okay. The comment I wanted to share our experience around co-creation. So I'm really happy that everyone on the panel has been talking about co-creation. That's extremely important. We come from the impact evaluation side, not Earth observation, and happy to partner with anyone, obviously. But what we've been doing in the past 5-6 years is really to embed impact evaluators, so our staff, into government agencies to really co-create from the ideation stage impact evaluation projects. So these platforms exist. It's not only IPA that has been doing that. There are a lot of organizations following a similar model. So I think that could be another interesting way to really collaborate and free ride, right, on such platforms. We were also talking, by the way, about specific uses. Right? One big area of collaboration is around ministries of labor. They're really interested in impact evaluation, and a lot of the input we saw during these past 2 days was really about potentially exploring migration, urban, so rural, urban migration. There is a lot of fertile ground there. And then a question, and maybe it's more than a question, it's a can of worms, but Lilian, you've been mentioning data sharing, right? And this brings in questions around data protection and treating data confidentially and consent. Once we push to the limits, the idea of georeferenced information, we're talking about knowing exactly who is doing what where. And yeah, geolocation is a PII. And so I don't know if you see this as a challenge, as an opportunity, if there is some thinking around that, because it's something we've been obviously dealing with on the traditional impact evaluation, and this is just heightened with remote sensing.
Thank you. A good question. I think many of us have been dealing with that. I mentioned we collected data, panel data over a number of years. We have the GPS coordinates for the households, and we share data with many people except that one file, because we also have data privacy regulations to follow. We have consent forms we've signed with the participants in the survey. So it becomes very difficult. How do we use that data? So it lies there. We use it internally, but when we share with you very good data, we keep that away, and people keep asking us questions. In fact, we've been asking ourselves in the last quarter, what do we do with this data? Very important data, but not being used. So we'd like to hear more from others. How can we better use that data? Keeping in mind that privacy is a critical issue here.
What we actually do is that we anonymize these data sets, so to protect personal information, so for ethical reasons. So most of the time, personal information is coded in such a way that you cannot identify anybody for ethical reasons. But I agree it is a challenge, really. Yeah.
I think the issue is that once you give the GPS coordinates, you'll be able to track someone. We use that information good for follow-up surveys. We know where the households are. For example, if we don't have the phone number of the respondent, we are able to use that for follow-up. But I'm not sure we are ready to share it with anyone else. So I think that's the question of that GPS coordinate of the household. How do we share that kind of information?
But I think the person who is going to utilize the data before sharing, the person must actually explain why he or she needs the data, what he or she is going to do with that data set. So I don't imagine a situation where somebody would want to follow somebody to the exact location to do harm, you know. So I think that may not be really a big question because actually, if we follow the protocols that have been put, even if you share with GPS, it is based on the understanding that the person honestly wants to use that data responsibly. There is that trust also at the same time. So even if the GPS coordinates are actually in the data set, you trust that the person is honest and that there is going to be responsible use of that data by the person who has requested. I think, I don't know whether I got what you are looking for. But I think it's about responsible use of the data that is being provided, even if it has GPS coordinates.
Anthony D'Agostino from Mathematica. Just on this topic, one of the ways that we've been able to get around this is kind of reversing the data workflow process. So oftentimes the partner doesn't actually need the GPS coordinates. They need the GPS coordinates to augment it with Sentinel data, MODIS data, et cetera. So if you as a data requester wanted to work with Lilian, one way to go about it is to provide the data and code to say, can you attach all these additional layers based on the GPS coordinates that you have with the households or the plots, and then return the values for those locations on a de-identified basis? So I think that there's ways to get around it. It just does mean that there's sort of shifting of the onus of the workflow in the code, but this is something that's been pretty successful for us, and I think that others might want to consider.
I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
I'm Marcel from American Institute for Research. Most part of my question already answered, but I'm gonna ask it. So it's about interaction with users, and specifically my question is with regard to Digital at Africa. When I look around like different data provider, different platforms of Earth observation, I often see like, a lot of them has built like a really nice UI UX, visualization, for the user that, you can go explore, see what's there. But oftentimes I come across that, it lacks a good way to access the data, like, because often like a researcher needs to easy and frequent access to data, like, to build like a easy, like, a data pipeline to process data easily. And I'm looking at, Digital Life Africa, I see like you address a lot of those, shortcomings that I see here and there. And I noticed that you have like even have a Jupyter notebook, for data. So my question is like, how do you like balance between these two? Because like both feature has, pros and cons, sometimes, as you mentioned, the researcher and many times, some of my colleagues, like impact evaluator researcher, but they don't have like a lot of exposure to Earth observation. So they need that the UI UX to see what's exactly out there, what they can do. But also like, there's need to like, fast, quick process of the data to use it for research. So if you can elaborate on that, how do you like balance between these two, and what do you see like Digital of Africa like moving forward? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's a great question, and you're right. There's a trade-off in the way that we present our data, in that we can provide users with an analytical environment that gives them a whole range of flexibility, but it also puts an expectation on them to kind of know what they're doing in terms of accessing and analyzing and visualizing, et cetera, the data. Or we can put it in a rather accessible dashboard format, but that reduces the flexibility, and it's quite prescriptive in terms of the outputs and the interpretations that the user can get. So the default, I guess, is to enable that flexibility, but provide a little bit of training for how we see users most frequently interacting with the data. So we'll say, look, here's a new product at the moment where we're working towards launching a water bodies product for the African continent in November. So that will identify It'll be a vector-based product with all the water bodies in Africa, and it'll have a time series of how full that water body is. So people will be able to access that via the sandbox quite flexibly, but we'll have some demonstration notebooks to say, look, here's an example from the rangelands in Kenya. These are the type of analyses you can do. If we have a identified interest for a dashboard, I guess we do those on case-by-case basis, and maybe our economists could help us out figuring out which ones are worthwhile and which ones are not. But if we come to the view that there's sufficient user demand and we'll get enough use out of a dashboard. So an example recently is our coastlines product, which again is a vector product that shows the rate of erosion and advancement of coastlines all around Africa. And it's a product that's very well suited to a dashboard. We've had multiple requests from multiple countries for a dashboard, and all of those requests have had the same kinds of statistics. They want to know the area that's been lost to erosion, the rate of erosion. So the requests are quite uniform. There's not that need for flexibility, and so there's a clear case for a dashboard there. So hopefully that helps. That's kind of the thought process that we go through.
Great. Go ahead, Rachel.
I would say we have to continue this conversation over lunch on the 8th floor. But first of all, I just want to take a moment to thank all our panelists for joining us today.